Hello class, this is the lesson for May the 10th of 2020, and we continue our online study of the book of Revelation in context of the end times. So let me just get started with a word of prayer. Father, even though we are meeting in this strange fashion where we are distant from each other, we pray that your spirit would still be in our midst and would teach us through whatever medium it is. We know that you can still reach out to us. We ask that you give us wisdom and insight and understanding in what we are studying today. So as I mentioned, we're continuing to have our deep dive into the book of Revelation. We're going to conclude our look at the sort of pauses and interludes, and then even the book of Revelation. So we'll go from Revelation chapter 17 through 22. Then after that, kind of give you a little separate lesson if you want to look at how the Jewish feasts fit into the book of Revelation. I gave you a hint of that at Easter. Then next lesson will really be about this abomination of desolation, how Revelation, what we've seen in Thessalonians, and in Daniel fit together. And it's really a way where we're going to start piecing all of these disparate passages together. The Olivet Discourse, Daniel, and the book of Revelation. And then finally we'll get back to the rapture. What is it? Is there one? Is it in the book of Revelation or not? So where we are in the book of Revelation is the seven bowls of wrath, and I'm not going to go into any detail in these. This is just a pictorial view of them. There's the painful sores, the sea being turned to blood and everything in it dying, then the rivers and springs being turned to blood, scorching men with fires, the sun burns hot, the throne of the beast, his kingdom plunged into darkness, then finally the river Euphrates being dried up so that the kings of all the earth can get to the plain of Megiddo for the battle of Armageddon. And then finally, it is done. There's hail, there's earthquakes, there's mountains that are toppled as the earth is finally judged and Christ wins the battle. Now, the thing that's kind of different about these bowls of wrath is they are now going to affect the entire earth. Previously, we had seen a quarter of the earth being affected, and then in the trumpets, a third of the earth being affected. Now it's 100%, all of it, every time. So in the midst of these bowl judgments, we have Revelation 17 and 18. Again, one of these interludes, these pauses. So let me go ahead and quickly read Revelation 17, the first 8 verses for you. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality, and with the wine of whose sexual immorality the dwellers on earth have become drunk." And he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality. And on her forehead was written a name of mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and of earth's abominations. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, and the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. When I saw her, I marveled greatly. But the angel said to me, "Why do you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman, and of the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns that carries her. The beast that you saw was, and is not, and is about to rise from the bottomless pit and go to destruction. And the dwellers on earth whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world will marvel to see the beast, because it was, and is not, and is to come." Okay, we're looking here at this interlude, and we get introduced to this great prostitute who commits sexual immorality with all the dwellers of the earth. They just have become drunk with this. There's a lot of speculation as to who the great prostitute is, and it's a mystery, but she's got it written on her forehead that she's Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and the earth's abominations. Now, this written on her head in Rome, and remember that John is writing this at the time that Rome is the world power. In Rome, prostitutes actually did write their names on their foreheads. So that was a common thing at that time. But, then you ask the question, well, why Babylon, and why is she the mother of prostitutes? But if you think back, it's primarily in the Old Testament that the concept of adultery or prostitution is analogous to one falling away from worship of the one true God. So if you only worship the one true God, you are faithful. And if you are worshiping other gods, you are committing sexual immorality. You're being an adulterous person. And the concept here is that somehow Babylon is the mother of all of these other religions that entice people to fall away from the one true God. And not only that, because people fall away from following the one true God, then the blood of saints and martyrs are sort of upon this woman, because in the name of these other religions, they persecute and kill saints. Now, the other thing we learn about this woman is she comes in riding on a scarlet beast. And we've seen the 7 heads and 10 horns before. Now, this time it's a scarlet beast. And, from what we've seen in Daniel, what we've seen before, the beast is a representation of kingdoms. But, scarlet is a color that often represents that kind of authority of a kingdom. But the woman herself has also got purple and scarlet. And purple is also indicative of somebody of royal descent. And she's also got all this gold and jewels and a golden cup full of abominations and impurities, things that entice people. Now we'll get some more details about her in the second half of Revelation 17. So let me go ahead and just finish reading that, and then we'll talk some more about her. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. They are also 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. And when he does come, he must remain only a little while. As for the beast that was and is not, it is an 8th, but it belongs to the 7, and it goes to destruction. And the 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received royal power, but they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour, together with the beast. These are of one mind, and they hand over their power and authority to the beast. They will make war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them, for he is the Lord of lords and King of kings, and those with him are called and chosen and faithful. And the angel said to me, the waters that you saw, where the prostitute is seated, are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages. And the 10 horns that you saw, they and the beast will hate the prostitute. They will make her desolate and naked, and devour her flesh, and burn her up with fire. For God has put into their hearts to carry out his purpose by being of one mind, and handing over their royal power to the beast, until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman that you saw is the great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth. All right, so we're getting some more details here as the angel kind of reveals a little bit about this. And you're probably saying to yourself, I wish the angel revealed a whole lot more. Well, this is what we've got. But, it starts out by telling us that the 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. Now, remember that this is written in the days of Rome, and Rome is known as the city that is built on 7 hills or 7 mountains. So there's certainly some indication, some evidence that this is at that time about Rome. It also says that we've got 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. So just as the beast was and is not, and it is an 8th, but belongs to the 7 and goes to destruction, we've also got these kings, 5 of whom have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. We're told explicitly that the 10 horns are 10 kings, but again, they have not yet come. They haven't received their power. So there's a lot that's yet to come. And they give their authority for some short period of time with the beast. And their purpose is to make war on the Lamb, but they will be conquered by the king. Now, we're also given an indication of what the waters are that the woman comes out of. Now, if you remember previously, we saw the dragon, the beast, coming out of the sea, and we said that, in the Jewish mindset, the sea, the ocean, it indicates evil, the unknown. Well, in this case, the waters are all the peoples of the earth, all of the multitudes, the nations that are drunk with these abominations of the prostitute. And at some point, the 10 horns, those 10 kings, they and the beast will hate the prostitute, and they will bring about desolation, nakedness. They will devour up her flesh and burn her with fire. For God has put it into their hearts to carry out his purpose. Now, this is interesting, that we have this woman, and I said that she is a representation of, in some sense, things that have come from Babylon that entice people to fall away from the worship of the one true God. And we have the 10 kings and this beast at some point who turn on that. So it's a replacement of a religious system. People have been enticed to fall away from the one true God, and at some point this beast is going to turn on that religious system and make it desolate. And this is God's purpose. He puts it into their heart to carry this out. Now, there's a whole lot of speculation about what exactly the religious system is that this woman represents. There was a guy named Hislop in the 1800s who wrote a book that said that Nimrod is the one who started the city of Babylon, and he started this Babylonian cult, and there was a father, a holy mother, and a blessed son that were in that kind of the unholy trinity, which is also very similar to what we see in like the Canaanite worship of Baal. Baal is the son and Ashtoreth is the mother. And Julius Caesar actually was the head of the Babylonian cult in Rome at one point. And many of the temples that were in Rome actually still were following on practices that were started in this Babylonian cult. Now, there may be some hints of truth to this, but it relied a lot on some archaeology, which is a little bit questionable. But I think the part of it that we can take that's truth is that it's just the idea of anything that entices people to fall away from the one true God. And clearly Baal type worship has throughout the ages done that. And remember, that Baal worship, they were a fertility cult. It was basically the idea of, I want blessings, I want fertility, I want my crops to grow, I want to have children, I want for myself. And at its worst, the fertility cults, got people to sacrifice their own children, because that was a sign of human fertility. I'm going to give up some of that, sacrifice it to these gods, and in return, I'm going to get blessed materially. My crops will grow, my animals will reproduce. And, that's the kind of abomination that the world gets drunk on. Now, following on with that idea of Hislop, later on there was a book that was written by a guy named Dave Hunt, The Woman That Rides the Beast. And even Hislop kind of made this connection, but Dave Hunt made it even stronger, saying that the woman is actually the Roman Catholic Church. Okay, well, there's a connection with Rome, and when the Roman Catholic Church was started by Constantine, he adopted many of the practices that were going on in the Roman temples at the time. And certainly the reason that we celebrate Easter on the day that we do, we celebrate Christmas on the day that we do, is because they were already celebrating those in Rome to these other gods. And you can make the connection to the Ashtoreth and Baal, or the Holy Mother and the Blessed Child. for those holidays. And also, the priests, the vestments that they wear, having temples with steeples, priests who have special powers, paying penance, the idea of going to a priest to do confession. They link all of these back to this Babylonian cult. So, maybe there's some truth to it, but the Roman Catholic Church is, in my opinion, not the beast, or not the woman who rides the beast explicitly, because I don't think it's a specific religion. I think it's anything that entices people away from true worship of God. And people have also speculated that currently the other dominant world religion is Islam, and they think that the woman is actually related to that, and the Antichrist is actually the Mahdi. The end time eschatology for Islam has this Mahdi coming back, and he comes with Jesus. And people will equate the Mahdi with the Antichrist and this fake Jesus as the false prophet that we saw before. And so, this religious system that entices people to fall away from God then would be Islam. So lots of speculation as to exactly who the woman is, who this prostitute is. But in my opinion, it just represents anything that makes people fall away from worshiping the one true God. All right, so let's look at the first part of Revelation 18. It says, "After this I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was made bright with his glory. And he called out with a mighty voice, 'Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place for demons, a haunt for every unclean spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean and detestable beast. For all nations have drunk the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have grown rich from the power of her luxurious living.' Then I heard another voice from heaven saying, 'Come out of her, my people, lest you take part in her sins, lest you share in her plagues. For her sins are heaped as high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Pay her back as she herself has paid back others, and repay her double for her deeds. Mix a double portion for her in the cup she mixed. As she glorified herself and lived in luxury, so give her a like measure of torment and mourning, since in her heart she says, I sit as a queen. I am no widow, and mourning I shall never see. For this reason her plagues will come in a single day, death and mourning and famine, and she will be burned up with fire. For mighty is the Lord God who has judged her. And the kings of the earth who committed sexual immorality and lived in luxury with her will weep and wail over her when they see the smoke of her burning. They will stand far off in fear of her torment and say, Alas, alas, you great city, you mighty city Babylon, for in a single hour your judgment has come." So in this passage, we kind of see the fruition of this judgment that falls upon the prostitute, Babylon. And, it just tells us here that all the nations have drunk of this wine. But there's a warning for us as believers. It says, "Come out of her, my people, lest you take part in her sins and take part in her plagues." There's also a lot of statements where she sits as a queen and she just says, "No, nothing bad can ever happen to me. I will never be a widow. I will never mourn." But very quickly, she will see in a single day death, mourning, famine, being burned up as her judgment comes. And a lot of the world will mourn as they see this. So just, visually recapping what we have seen in these chapters, we've got the woman who's adorned in purple and scarlet. holding her golden chalice of abominations. She's got all of her gold adornments and pearls, riding this scarlet beast, and all the kings of the earth are drinking of her abominations. You know? But at some point, the beast turns on her. So the 10 kings, 10 horns, and the beast turn on her. Now, one of the things that we were introduced to was the beast that was, is not, and is to come. You know, the 7 heads. Now, it tells us that they're kings, and 5 have fallen, 1 is, and then 1 is yet to come. When we studied the book of Daniel, many times he had 3 different visions, starting with the one of the statue. He introduced us to these world kingdoms and the kings that led them, starting with Babylon. Then from Babylon we had Medo-Persia, then Greece, and finally Rome. Well, if we actually ask the question, what nations have subjugated Israel, you can easily find 2 prior to that. Because Babylon conquered Judah and Benjamin in 586, 587 BC. But prior to that, the northern 10 tribes had fallen in 722 BC to Assyria. And then prior to that, the entire nation of Israel was subjugated for almost 400 years in Egypt. So if we add those 2 to the list, who would have been prior to when Daniel was prophesying, we now have this list here of 6 kingdoms. And then the question then becomes, okay, what's coming after that? Now, if we remember, the statue that Daniel saw had the legs of iron that represented Rome, and then after that there was clay mixed with iron that made up the feet and the toes. And how many toes are there? There are 10. Another time when this 10 comes up. So we've got 1 really left to come. But what about this beast that was, is not, and is yet to come, and it's only going to remain a little while? Well, you can think of this kingdom of Rome. Certainly it was. Today, Rome is not. There is no kingdom of Rome. But if it's reconstituted and rebuilt and it comes back, it will be. And this is indicating that it will be only a little while. Now, why would it say that it's an 8th, but it belongs to the 7? Well, in Scripture, 7 is part of a pattern that repeats. But when you break the pattern, then you get an 8th. We talked about there is an 8th day celebration with one of the festivals, the Feast of Tabernacles, and that's an indication of breaking of the pattern. And so one interpretation is, okay, this is the end of the pattern. There's not going to be any more, but it really is just the 7th. Another interpretation is that it's because it was and is not, and it comes back. 8th is also associated with resurrection, and Christ was resurrected, and likewise this kingdom of Rome will be resurrected. Now, all of this is clearly only going to work if we have this thinking that this is a resurrected Rome Empire. It seems to fit this, but there's nothing that says explicitly that this has got to be Rome. I put some other passages over here. The other ways that you can kind of work with the numbers to get things like 8. In Daniel 7, it talks about there being the 10 horns, 3 fall, and then 1 comes. and that's the one that speaks great things that we associate with this man of lawlessness or the Antichrist. But if you add 10, take away 3, and add 1, you get 8. So, is this the reason why it's the 8th? It's the 8th horn, 8th king. And the other point I wanted to make is, with all of these kingdoms, we need to think about them having a spiritual component. In Daniel 10, Daniel had been praying, and it says that this angel wanted to come and give him understanding, but the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood him for 21 days, but finally the archangel Michael came and helped him. So this prince of the kingdom of Persia is also an angel, a fallen angel, a demon who had been fighting against this angel who was coming to Daniel. And likewise, all of these kingdoms have some demonic presence behind them that's fighting for them. And that's still true even today. So let's talk a little bit more about Babylon, because it does appear a lot in Old Testament passages. So here we're looking at Jeremiah 51. And Jeremiah is a prophet who prophesied in the years leading up to when Babylon conquered the southern kingdoms around 586, 587 BC. But he said Babylon was a golden cup in Yahweh's hand. Well, if you remember, the woman riding the beast had a golden cup in her hand. But it also says there that Babylon was God's hammer and weapon of war that he will use to break nations and destroy kingdoms. Babylon was a hammer and weapon of God. Now think about that for a second. Babylon is being associated with this woman, this prostitute that entices people to fall away from worship of God. And yet at the same time, this kingdom, the woman we can think of as kind of the religious side, and then the kingdom side is being used as this weapon of God. Even things that are abominations can still be used by God to accomplish his purposes, and that is certainly appears to be the case with Babylon. But ultimately, Babylon will face its judgment, because in the spiritual sense, all of this blood of the prophets and saints are on her head. Now, here's a passage out of Ezekiel. It says, "You, Israel, played the whore also with the Assyrians." So Israel referring to the northern 10 tribes. And again, this idea of whoring, prostitution, following away from the one true God, following the ways of the Assyrians. And the Assyrians are the ones who conquered the northern 10 tribes. It says, because you were not satisfied, yes, you played the whore with them, and still you were not satisfied. You multiplied your whoring also with the trading land of Chaldea, which is Babylon. And even with this you were not satisfied. How sick is your heart, declares the Lord God, because you did all these things, the deeds of a brazen prostitute. So where do these prophets fit in the timeline? Jeremiah, Ezekiel. Well, we can see up here at the top, here is Jeremiah, and like I said, he prophesies up until around the time that Babylon conquered Judah. Here is Ezekiel, who is a contemporary of Jeremiah, although he started earlier and lasted longer. Here beside him is Daniel, who went even later than Ezekiel. Another prophet that we're going to look at is Habakkuk. He's earlier, so he was prophesying earlier and talking more about the Assyrians and the northern 10 tribes. And likewise, the other prophet we're going to talk about is Isaiah, who is up here. So Isaiah, he is actually prophesying during the time that the Assyrians conquered the northern 10 tribes in 722 BC, and then when Assyria actually came to Jerusalem with Hezekiah as king, and then they were turned back. Now, the reason I show you that timeline is because I've got these passages that talk about judgment of Babylon from these particular prophets. In Jeremiah chapter 50, it talks about this word of the Lord concerning Babylon, and it says, they will stumble and fall, and he will kindle a fire in his cities, and it will devour all that is around him. Fire and devouring are two of the words that we just saw in the book of Revelation about the judgment of Babylon. And then over here in Habakkuk, mostly the reason I pulled this passage out is because it says, this judgment is coming upon Babylon. But if it seems slow, wait for it. It will surely come, and it will not delay. If you think about the judgment on Babylon, at least this religious system, it would certainly seem like it's slow. It has not come. Babylon was a world power back in the 500 and some BC, and the religious system that it started was even much earlier than that. So it does seem slow, but it will surely come. And Isaiah tells us that when it comes, it will be cruel, filled with wrath and anger on the day of the Lord, which we associate with the end of the end. And it will make desolation, it will destroy sinners. And it's also equated with, this prostitute, this lover of pleasures, having the loss of children and widowhood. Again, these are the words that were spoken against this prostitute in Revelation. So many of the words of judgment coming on Babylon that we see in Revelation are actually pulled from these Old Testament passages. And so God allowed both the kingdom of Babylon and this religious system of Babylon to exist, and it has served his purposes. But when the end comes, his purposes will be fulfilled, and judgment will finally come on Babylon. So the rest of the book of Revelation are really the part that we really like. This is what we studied when we looked at heaven. So in Revelation 19, we have Jesus with his bride. We have the marriage supper of the Lamb. We have the millennial kingdom. So Satan is conquered, thrown into an abyss for 1,000 years. And then he's released for a short time, then final conquering, thrown into the lake of fire, and we get the second resurrection and the great white throne, the great white throne judgment. Then New Jerusalem comes down, and there's no more death. We get a new earth, and God tabernacles with his people for all eternity. And God sits in the temple. He's the water of life, and he provides light to everyone. And this is when he wipes away every tear from our eyes. Death is no more. There'll be no more mourning, no more crying, no pain, and all the former things will have passed away. And then finally, in this New Jerusalem, we see the prominent use of the number 12. And 12 in Scripture typically represents the idea of completion, perfection, or something coming to fruition, how things were intended to be. And we can see that there are 12 gates with 12 angels, the names of the 12 tribes there, 12 foundation stones, the 12 apostles, the size of it also being 12 by 12 and 12,000 stadia, 12 pearls, and ultimately this tree of life is going to bear 12 kinds of fruit. Again, the culmination, the perfection, the intent is finally realized for God and his people in the New Jerusalem. So, this is ultimately what we are looking for. So that kind of concludes our study, deep dive into the book of Revelation. And in our next lesson, we're going to start trying to assemble all these disparate pieces that we have seen out of the Olivet Discourse, the book of Daniel, and Revelation. So till next time, goodbye.